Dear members of Italian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore and members of Associazione Italia-ASEAN, distinguished guests, dear friends, I'm Giacomo Abiso, Managing Director of the Italian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. We are very proud to welcome all of you today for the webinar organized by ACCS in collaboration with Associazione Italia-ASEAN. The event is also part of our activities related to the 30th anniversary of the Italian Chamber of Commerce, which was founded as the Italian Business Association in 1991 in Singapore. Now I leave the virtual floor to the moderator of the event, Mr. Romeo Orlandi, Vice President of Associazione Italia-ASEAN. Thank you again, and thank you, Mr. Orlandi.
Giacomo, unfortunately, I think Mr. Romeo is on mute.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for my friends in Singapore. Buongiorno, buon pomeriggio per gli amici italiani. Thanks, President Martinelli. Thanks, President Prodi and Ambassador Langella and all the distinguished guests. The reason for these webinars is to study a bit more about the exchange of capitals, the flows of capitals between Italy and Singapore, specifically for what the companies did over the last few years. I know this is a celebration for the Chamber of Commerce as well, which was established 30 years ago. Allow me a bit of recollection of a personal memory. I was one of the founders of the Italian Business Association together with Mr. Fabri and Mr. Sitori 30 years back, and so I'm proud and delighted to see such a big development. The program today will go as follows. So we will have a welcome address by ICSS President Alberto Martinelli, to be followed by the speech of President Romano Prodi, new president of the Italy-ASEAN Association. Thank you, President Prodi, for being here as the, let's say, inauguration of your presidency. Then the keynote speech will be done by Ambassador of Italy in Singapore, Raffaele Langella. And then actually we will have the so-called digital roundtable. The first speech will be by Kimberly Koo, Regional Director of EDB Singapore. And then we have 3 Italian companies, Maurizio Luongo, CEO of Menarini Asia Pacific, Monica Zoli, CEO of DZ Engineering, and Timothy Kosulic of Fratelli Kosulic, CEO of the group. There will be probably time for some questions and answers, and then we will have some closing remarks. We foresee to close this event something like 11 o'clock, maybe 11:10. So allow me to start the series of speeches, giving the floor to President Alberto Martinelli, President of the Italy-Singapore Chamber of Commerce. President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Romeo. Thank you very much, Mr. Orlandi. His Excellency Raffaele Langella, Ambassador of Italy to Singapore. Their President Romano Prodi of Italian ASEAN Foundation. Distinguished guests, on behalf of the Italian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, ICCS Board, a warm welcome to today's event. Thank you for attending it. As was pointed out, ICCS marks in this 2021 its 30th year's anniversary of activities. It's a remarkable milestone. It's a milestone which was built over all this year thanks to the business connection and business network in the region. ICCS leverages, of course, on Singapore international logistic, financial, trading, human resources, and regulatory hub to tap into the ASEAN surrounding countries. That's why sorry, I hear an echo. If I can ask everyone to mute, please. Thank you. That is the reason why over all this year, in the past 2 years, we have been closing some memorandum of understanding with some business association, for instance, the Malaysian, the Indonesian, and the Cambodian one. And that's why we, on a daily basis, work with other Italian Chamber of Commerce of the surrounding countries, such as Thailand, Hong Kong, Vietnam, the Philippines, Korea. Such fruitful collaboration was, of course, fostered by the Italian government, was coordinated by the several embassies of the surrounding nation. And of course, it was done in collaboration with Assocamere Estere, which is our international association body for chambers abroad. Of course, we were delighted in 2018 that also the Singapore government shows us its support, because in 2018, we closed a memorandum of understanding with the EDP, with the Economic Development Board. Once again, thank you very much. And thank you to the Italian-ASEAN Association for providing further visibility for business opportunity for Italian companies in the ASEAN country and vice versa, because Asia is not just China or India. Actually, we do believe that for contingent reason, demographic reason, the rising star are the ASEAN countries. ICCS has been observing and helping over the years several initiatives, such as in the pharma, that's why we will hear from Menarine, energy sector, traditional, and also the efficiency systems. We had smart mobility investments, either in electric vehicles or into driverless technology. We had the food and the tech farming. And last but not least, also packaging. Allow me to say a few words about the packaging, because as you might be aware, the ASEAN countries are facing a challenge due to the plastic pollution across the ASEAN seas. Well, this is mainly due to the consumer habits in this part of the world, but also to the e-commerce growth, which has been double-digit growth over the past 5 years and is meant to continue such growth. Now, if you are aware, in the e-commerce, you have basically 7 different layers of packaging, and mainly is plastic. Well, we do believe that Italian design and packaging companies, they might play a role to solve these issues, and they might provide some help. So I'm really eager to listen further from our speaker about their success story, about their best sharing practice, and thank you very much.
Thank you, President Martinelli. The floor now is given to President Romano Prodi.
Sorry, I am only a guest today. I hope to become familiar later. Look, I have an ancient link with Singapore. Maybe one of the first Italians to have a big investment in Singapore when I was president of IRI in 1994. I came to Singapore with the biggest investment. It was, in that time, one of the biggest European investment, ST Electronics. And so I never stopped to be linked to Singapore. And I tell you one, if you give me 1 second, last time I met President Lee, it was an incredible meeting. He was already out of power. And I came to his home and I told him, President, so beautiful is Singapore, is full of flowers. And he told me, yes, President, is full of flowers. But, you know, there are also some drawbacks because I sent my botanics everywhere in the tropical areas. They came with many types of flowers. And so we have flowers every day of the year. But remember that our bees don't anymore make honey because they have flowers every day. And you, politician, you must be very careful to have a policy for food every day. You know, I never forgot this teaching, you know, because it was incredible. And he told me, we asked for bees from Italy. They have been here for a couple of years. They were producing honey, then they stopped. And so my strange long relation with Singapore ended with this incredible meeting, you know, and I'm so happy to be back in some official role, you know. Singapore is really something incredible. I don't need to let's say to stress how important their role, not only economic, generally. Singapore is considered an economic hotspot, you know. Singapore is much more. Is the symbol of mediations, in the symbol of mixing up cultures, and you know, clearly is a great spot of new technology. And so I repeat, I don't want to make any sermon in my first, let's say, my first day of effective presidency of Italian ASEAN Foundation. But I am happy to start with Singapore because it's the beginning of everything in ASEAN. And so thank you. Happy to be with you. This is my first, certainly not last meeting we have together. And I tell you that very soon I shall come to Singapore because I have an official invitation and I already accepted. And so as soon as my prison will end, I can get out of jail because of virus, I shall take a plane to come to Singapore and meet you personally.
Thank you, President Prodi, for your warm speech, the inauguration of your presidency. Now the floor is given to Ambassador Raffaele Langella. Raffaele, please go ahead.
Thank you, Romeo. Thank you, President Prodi. I mean, welcome to this community of the Italia-ASEAN Association, and thank you, and Singapore. You know Singapore very well. I mean, you've been there several times. I'm looking forward to meeting you again in Singapore as soon as the sanitary conditions will allow us to do so. But I mean, I know that Singapore is quite an important place in your landscape. I mean, so I'm very glad to participate in this meeting together with you. Thank you, Alberto Martinelli. Thank you, President of the Italian Chamber of Commerce. You know that my opinion of the Chamber of Commerce, the Italian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, is very high. I mean, you have been quite a powerful and
Raffaele, we cannot hear you.
Disappeared.
But we are happily pleased about the praise of His Excellency.
I feel the need to the Italian. Pardon?
We lost you for some seconds, Raffaele.
Yes, unfortunately, I was saying that the connection is very bad because I'm obliged to use my mobile since Zoom is not allowed on our official platform, so I cannot use my normal desktop, my normal computer. Anyway, I mean, it's
Raffaele, the connection is lost again.
Singapore, as you know, is quite. Some of them, they are represented today by their CEOs or their representatives. So it will be very interesting for me to listen to their experience. It would be very important and very interesting for me, and I hope for everybody, to listen to their impressions on the possible future scenario that we will face in Singapore and the whole region. You know that in the last 12 months, two main issues have been affecting the business framework, the business scenario here in Singapore. The pandemic, of course, and the competition between the US and China. Singapore has been benefiting from the eclipse of Hong Kong, I would say, for quite a number of months. I mean, several dozens billion US dollars have been diverted from Hong Kong to Singapore. The investment flow has been growing steadily for the last few months, but still, this is maybe a side effect of the US-China competition. We don't know if and when Singapore will be obliged to take a stronger stand vis-a-vis this kind of competition. What will be the long-term effects of this geostrategic and geopolitical, I wouldn't say fight, but geostrategic and geopolitical race. Singapore has been prospering for 50 years, knowing that it could rely on the economic and political framework of the Western world, the US in particular, but also Europe. And I mean, the close proximity, which was cultural and economic also with China. And we all wonder how this kind of balance will be granted in the future. I mean, what Singapore will decide to do in order to make this scenario sustainable for the coming future. And of course, pandemic, we know that the landscape has changed a lot since March, since February, indeed, in Singapore last year. Menarini will tell us about the pharmaceutical sector in Singapore. We know that they are not directly engaged in this vaccine race, but still they have quite a deep knowledge of the pharmaceutical sector. So they could tell us how the international cooperation with Singapore and with the other countries of the region can help pharmaceutical companies to prosper and to develop their products and their business. So without further ado, I mean, I will give the floor back to Romeo, and I mean, I'm looking forward to listening to you and to your experiences. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Raffaele. Thank you, Ambassador Langella. Now let's go straight to the focal point of our initiative. Now the floor is given to Kimberly Koo, European representative of the Economic Development Board of Singapore, prestigious authority in the fields of attracting and promoting investment. Kimberly, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Orlandi. So I think everyone can hear me. If anyone can't during the presentation, just let me know. So good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly. As Mr. Orlandi mentioned, I am part of the Economic Development Board. I am based in our London office, and I cover Italy from here. So I just moved up to London a few weeks ago, and previously I spent about 5 to 6 years in EDB in the Singapore office. So I want to kind of talk firstly about the relationship between Singapore and Italy, which is a big part of the discussion today. As we have mentioned earlier, and President Prudi talked about this as well, Singapore and Italy actually share quite a special relationship. Italy was one of the first few countries to actually recognize Singapore's independence way back in 1965. And from that point onwards, actually, we have developed quite a good base of companies who have set up in Singapore. So today, there are over close to 300 companies in Singapore that are from Italy. And likewise, Singaporean companies have also made their journey to actually enter Italy itself. Today, if we look at some of the companies that are in Singapore that are originating from Italy, we have a good mix of companies from the energy and chemical sector, from the professional services sector, from healthcare, as well as from some of the tech sectors. One of the very few companies that started out in Singapore right after our independence was ST Microelectronics, and I'm happy to hear that President Prodi has a relationship with them as well from his time there. ST Microelectronics today has become a very big player in Singapore, and they have their Asia Pacific headquarters located here as well. So beyond ST Microelectronics, just to share a few examples, we have also seen companies such as Ferrero invest in Singapore in 2017. They set up their Singapore Innovation Center. And a big part of the reason why they decided to do that was because of the amount of partnerships that they could get in Singapore. So there was a lot of engagement with our local research community, and in particular, the Agency for Science, Technology and Research, or A*STAR, which they were working very closely with. In addition to Ferrero and ST Microelectronics, we also have Corm from the chemical sector, which set up in 2002. And they have, over the past 20 years or so, have really grown their presence in Singapore. So in general, we welcome interest from Italy, be it from any of these sectors, and we're very happy to actually understand a bit more about your plans. What I find interesting as well is that we have also seen a lot of interest from Singaporean companies to look at Italy. And this has been in a big range of areas. For example, the investment company Temasek, which some of you might be familiar with, they've also made their first Italian investment in 2016. They invested in Moncler, which is the Italian-French luxury company, of course. And beyond that, we've also seen GIC, which is also another sovereign wealth fund that we have, actually make an investment in several Italian companies, even in the past few months, right? So I think COVID-19 hasn't actually dampened this interest that we're seeing from some of the companies that are based in Singapore. So the next part of the presentation, I want to talk a bit about why our companies, be it European companies, Italian companies, or other companies that are outside of Singapore, actually looking to invest in Singapore. And I want to summarize 3 main reasons why they're doing so. Firstly, Singapore is, of course, a very business-friendly and innovative environment. I think this is not a surprise for many of you on the call, especially with our distinguished panelists today. Singapore is first in the world for doing business. I don't want to talk too much about this, but generally it's very quick and it doesn't cost much to set up a company in Singapore. So that's how I can summarize the situation. But on top of that, I think what we've also done quite a bit of in the past few years is actually to build up Singapore as a center for innovation and to become an innovative environment where companies across the world can come to Singapore to actually innovate with some of the players that we have here today. We have a good base of incubators, accelerators, startups, as well as venture capital funds that are in Singapore. We have over 3,000 startups already. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of companies are coming to Singapore to actually take advantage of this ecosystem that we have built. And we, of course, welcome interest from Italy to do the same. The second is that Singapore offers a very diverse talent pool with the right expertise. If we look at the local talent pool today, we have actually a very highly educated and trained workforce. And we also continue to actually talk about investing in continuous education. So no matter whichever level you're at, within a company, we want to encourage you to train and to be future ready in terms of digital and technology skills. I also want to emphasize that we have a very diverse talent pool, and this is really coming from global talent across the group. Even with the global pandemic at this point, I also want to share that we are still welcome for global talent to actually come to Singapore. And we can actually help you to facilitate some of that entry, even though there is, the obviously pandemic considerations across the world. The last part of which is quite relevant to, of course, the topic of the discussion today. Singapore provides access to the most fast-growing region in the world, which is ASEAN. I think everyone will be familiar that ASEAN is actually one of the largest and the most fastest growing regions in the world. Today, actually, ASEAN has a larger population than the EU itself or even the US. So there is a lot of opportunity in ASEAN. But one of the challenges that we're seeing is that ASEAN is not a homogeneous market. It is very fragmented and there are very different characteristics in each market. So that's where we think Singapore plays an important role, because Singapore can come in to actually help you to understand the nuances of each market and to help you access the rest of Southeast Asia from Singapore. So these are the three main areas. Generally, between Singapore, we want to position Singapore as also a gateway for Italy to engage and access Southeast Asia. So on top of what we've discussed earlier on as well, we have a FTA that is valid between the EU and Singapore. This was the first FTA that the EU has signed with any Southeast Asian nation, and that has already been in place some time back. We also have a long-term trading relationship between the EU as well as Singapore, and we're actually looking forward to growing that, especially in terms of all the developments that we've been seeing across the region. So those were the first two parts of the presentation. I want to touch on the last point, which is to talk about some of the initiatives that Singapore has been rolling out and two particular sectors that I think could be quite interesting to share with the audience today. So there are many areas in general that we welcome interest from Italy, but I think there are two sectors that could be fairly interesting given the similarities that we have between Singapore, Singapore and Italy. So in general, what we've done earlier this year is to launch the Singapore Green Plan 2030. I'm talking about this because it is a sustainability movement which will actually guide the way that we look at some of the investment priorities and some of the sectors that we're seeing in Singapore. The Singapore Green Plan was launched as a national sustainability movement earlier this year, and it talks about our concrete targets over the next 10 years in sustainability. For example, our plan is actually to reach net zero carbon emissions where possible, and possibly in the earlier half of 2050. So there is a lot of that we need to do, and we're looking at that from various aspects. We've carved out 5 pillars, and when it comes to particular sectors, we are looking at 2 that are quite interesting. The first is agri-tech or food tech, and the second is actually in the broader space of future mobility, urban mobility, or whatever you want to call it. So these are 2 sectors which are quite interesting, and we're actually happy to do more with Italian companies and to do more with the Italian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. So if I can talk about the agri-tech piece first. So agri-tech is something that is quite interesting for us because firstly, Singapore does not have an agricultural base like Italy does. We have a long time back, we decided that the most practical thing for us to do was to import the most of our food. And today we import about close to 90% of all our food that Singaporeans are actually consuming in Singapore. What we've realized, especially with COVID-19, that there is an increasing need to actually look at our food security and our food resilience. So because of that, we have launched the Singapore 30 by 30 vision. So if you've not heard of it, it essentially stands for 30 by 30 means 30% of Singapore's nutritional needs by 2030. So quite a catchy tagline there. Essentially what it looks at is introducing various technologies and companies that can help to accelerate Singapore's food resilience journey. And we're looking at companies in various aspects of agri-tech that we want to encourage them to come to Singapore and to develop proof of concepts and ideas. This is in a few areas. The first is in, for example, alternative proteins. So you may have heard quite a bit about what we're doing in the plant-based protein sector or the cultured meat sector. And I find it interesting that this is where a small country like Singapore is really able to make a difference because, for example, in cultured protein or cell cultured meat, this is where you need to actually have quite a bit of regulatory flexibility. So where we've come in is that we've actually become the first country in the world to actually approve the sale of cultured meat for consumption in Singapore. And this would be by Californian startup Eat Just, which is going to be selling their chicken nuggets, obviously chicken, cultured chicken in Singapore. And this will also be manufactured in Singapore. So that is really quite an exciting development for us. Beyond that, in the agri-tech space, we're also looking at urban agriculture. So Singapore, as I mentioned, we don't do a lot of farming in general, but we started our journey to look at actually urban agriculture a few years ago. And now with our vision of 30 by 30, we're looking to accelerate that. So we welcome interest from Italian companies or companies across the world who are looking at these sectors. The second part is future mobility. So future mobility or urban mobility, this is a very exciting industry for us, and we'll be looking at companies in 3 areas of urban mobility. The first is electric vehicles or EVs. The second is autonomous vehicles or AVs. And the last is actually urban air mobility or UAM. This is not probably commonly known, but cars were actually once manufactured in Singapore. The last was in 1980, where mass production was viable. Of course, with the big change in production, car manufacturing moved out of Singapore. But what is interesting is that next year, from 2022, cars will once more be manufactured in Singapore. with actually the setup of Hyundai's Global Innovation Center in Singapore. So Hyundai has come to invest in Singapore, and they'll be actually manufacturing close to 30,000 electric vehicles in Singapore from the year after this year. They are also going to be looking at open innovation and research and development into mobility or future mobility concepts, including autonomous vehicles, passenger drones, and other types of ride sharing. We welcome companies who would be interested to come to Singapore to develop new solutions, test them, and commercialize them. In autonomous vehicles, we have also opened up quite a bit of roads, actually over 1,000 kilometers for testing. You can think about it as our version of Torino's Smart Road project, which I know has also been doing the same thing. So on top of that, we have also looked at drones. We have designated our first drone estate covering over 200 hectares of space to actually test bed some of these innovative concepts. In 2019, we even had the first air taxi trial in Singapore with the German aviation startup Volocopter. So these are only two areas that we could do more together. Beyond agri-tech and urban mobility, we're also excited to explore a lot of different sectors with you, be it aerospace, healthcare, tech, design, etc. With this, I'd like to hand it back to Mr. Orlandi, and thank you very much for your interest and attention.
Thank you, Ms. Koo. Thank you, Kimberly. Your presentation was very, very comprehensive, and we always realize that Singapore wants to keep the competitive edge about sectors, about productivity. Thank you. We are receiving a lot of messages, warm messages of congratulations. Allow me just to acknowledge Senator Francesco Giacobbe from Australia, which is in charge also for Italian voting abroad in the ASEAN countries. Thanks, Senator Giacobbe, for your warm expressions. Now the floor is given to three Italian companies. They will illustrate what did induce them to invest in Singapore, how happy they are, which plans for the future they have. Now, please try to respect the limit of 8 minutes per company, starting with Maurizio Longo, CEO of Menarini Asia Pacific. Menarini, I believe, is a company on the front line these days. Mr. Longo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to Italy and Europe. Good afternoon to Singapore. It's really an honor for me to join this conference. I'll try to be really within the 8 minutes, and let me start by giving a few informations about what Menarini is, which is basically the largest Italian biopharmaceutical company in the world, number 12 in Euro 5, and number 31 in the global market. So it's one of the biggest players for sure. We are present in over 100 countries all over the world. We board over 17,500 employees. Here in Asia Pacific, we are present with the regional office in Singapore, and I'm glad to say that this will be the 10th year anniversary of Menarini in Asia Pacific and in Singapore, since the acquisition we made of a company at that time called Invida. And our regional office here in Singapore is basically allowing us to cover with direct presence 13 key markets and countries in the region, going from North Asia and Australasia, passing through Southeast Asia and arriving to India. It's very important for us, the presence here in Singapore as a regional office. And I would say that it's been a real important gateway for our organization to Asia Pacific. The development we experienced being here in Asia, and in particular in Singapore, has been amazing in the last 10 years. When we started, and I was part of the due diligence team at that time when we were coming to Singapore, when we started, the region represented only around 5% of the total turnover for Menarini Group. Today, we are at around 14% of the total turnover. And we recently developed a new blueprint for the region for the next 5 years, where we are outlooking at 20% contribution to a total turnover, which is, by the way, developing itself, worldwide for the group. So it's a really fast-growing development. That double-digit, we actually doubled down our turnover in the region in the last 5 years, and we will double down in the next 5. Why it is so important for us to be here in Singapore in particular and in Asia? The DNA of Menarini is basically the DNA of a partner of choice, because apart from the proprietary molecules and brands that we have a number of partnerships either with R&D players, startup players which have innovative molecules, but that need someone who is able to fund the latest phase of commercialization with a one-stop solution to enter, all the local authorities, register their molecules and then commercialize their molecules with all the capabilities. And this is an important mission that we have. And I believe Singapore represents really, as Ms. Kimberly Koo was saying before, a center of excellence in this sense. And so we can attract here, but we can also be a gateway for many European and also Italian companies which are very active in the R&D in the pharmaceutical sector. We can represent the gateway to enter one-stop solution 13 countries in Asia. So the presence here in Singapore becomes key to access both opportunities. On the other side, we are also partnering with many big multinationals which have mature products or molecules or pieces of portfolio which they are either divesting or not looking at anymore as a core business for them. And then, we can help them, managing the life cycle of this portfolio in the long run. And guess what? The vast majority of the global players in the pharmaceutical sector have their own regional office in Singapore. And of course, this is enabling us to enter in a more consistent and constant discussion with them. I'm meeting the CEOs of other pharmaceutical companies on a quite stable and frequent basis, and this is allowing to open a lot of new opportunities. Last but not least, why everything is working very well for us here in terms of development, being in Singapore, it's because we are accessing to an ecosystem of innovation, not only in the pharmaceutical industry itself, but even in the innovation of our processes, the digitalization, especially in this COVID era, post-COVID era, the digitalization of our processes and operations is becoming key to be competitive, efficient and effective on the market. And the ecosystem of development of new technologies, of new talents here in Singapore is really working very well. And we are accessing to a lot of startups, new players, that are enabling us to fast track our development, and maybe also entitle, again, also European companies which want to enter Asia to do so in an efficient way, thanks to the advancement in technology that we can bring working here in Singapore. So I believe the landscape and the outlook from Menarini side as a pharmaceutical company in Singapore is very positive, and we look at this region passing through Singapore, but looking at the entire region as a key driver of our development as a global corporation in the next 5 years, for sure.
Thank you, Dr. Luongo. The floor now is for you, Monica Zoli. I think we should go to another sector, very appealing, DZ Engineering CEO. Monica, for you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to this digital roundtable. It's really an honor for me. So DZ Engineering is a company of Dino Zoli Group Holding, and we entered in Singapore market 10 years ago. So is our 10th anniversary for us as well. And thanks to the acquisition of a company that was working in the lighting up of Singapore race track for the Formula One Grand Prix. We are a system integrator of lighting system, telecommunication systems, and our main business is motorsport, but not only. We have a expertise in artistic lighting, mainly in Italy, where there is the most important culture and historical heritage of the world. But it is really this integration, our strong, and we started with this job, this important job in Singapore. That was the main reason, because we decided to buy the company 10 years ago. We started with a branch, but in 2019 we founded a new co, DZE Asia, in order to develop our business here and in all the countries all around Singapore. Singapore has a lot of good features, such as attitude to innovation, culture, ferment, and reputation for reliability. That are all extremely important, strategic. We consider for us really a big opportunity to be here. And from here, with this good partnership with local companies grown in these 10 years. We work in Singapore and all around, in Malaysia, for example, for the Sepang circuit in motorsport. In Kuala Lumpur, we worked for the Formula Electric Grand Prix there, and thanks to our expertise in artistic lighting, we do in Singapore some important lighting up of important buildings in Singapore, such as Esplanade Theatres, conservatories of Gardens by the Bay, and the National Gallery. And we started from Singapore to work in Vietnam as well, in what should be the first Hanoi Grand Prix, cancelled in 2020 because of the pandemic. And Australia is another market, Thailand. Singapore is really a strategic hub. For us, there is a good feeling, a lot of connections in arts as well. For example, with our Gino Dori Foundation, that is a contemporary art museum, organized every year since 2015, important exhibition during the race week, the Formula One race week in Singapore, that are really appreciated from our stockholder, from our guests. And it's important, all the network that Singapore has to support the operativity here, and all the Italian organizations, such as Italian Chamber and Italia-ASEAN Association, because we feel really a big support, and it is easy for us work and develop our business. And last but not least is the feeling that our people love to work here. So it's a country, a safe country with strong but clear rules, and the life is really oriented to wellness and to welfare. So I could say only good words about Singapore country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jolie. Stay longer, stay safe. Okay. Now the floor is given to Timothy Kosulich, Group CEO of Fratelli Kosulich. This is, I believe, another sector on the front line for the pandemic, logistics, shipping, transportation. I believe you should have busy days these days.
Yes, I think, well, thank you very much. First of all, I think lately we've been in the news for the wrong reasons. There was a ship that was a little bit not perfectly placed in the Suez Canal. But yes, it's been a very interesting, I think, couple of years for the shipping industry. Of course, the pandemic has kept us busy on all fronts, not only to transport medical equipment, but in general, people have not stopped consuming. If anything, they increase consumption. So it's been very busy for shipping. So Fratelli Kosovic is a family business. We celebrate 164 years this year. We are now at the 6th generation. We're actually just about to welcome the 7th generation. So that makes me feel a little bit older as well. We've been in Singapore since the late 80s. Our first office in Asia was Hong Kong in the early 80s, and then a few years later we opened an office in Singapore. The group is involved in different aspects of shipping. We own ships, but then we also provide a number of services to the shipping industry. We are fuel traders, fuel physical supplier. We do freight forwarding, ship agency. We do catering for ships and platforms. We manage some yacht marinas, and then we provide services to yachts. We have an IT business, and in general, what we do is we try to provide services to the shipping industry as a whole. The core businesses in Singapore are related to fuel and yachting, mostly fuel. We are a physical supplier. We are a licensed physical supplier. We own and operate a small fleet of Singapore flagged tankers, 7 of them. And we've been operating in the port, since the beginning of our experience here in Singapore. The reason why we opened an office in Singapore in the first place was really because Singapore, as you probably know, is a very important hub in the shipping industry. And if we look at fuel specifically, then it's definitely the most important port in the world. Just to give you an idea of how important it is, you have roughly a volume of 50 million tons being supplied in the port of Singapore every year, and that's the number 1 in the world. Number 2 in the world is Fujairah with about 80 million tons. So if you look at ports between number 2 and number 10, probably combined, they don't make up for the volume that Singapore does in 1 year. So there's a huge difference in terms of volumes between Singapore and every other port. That is mostly due to the efficiency, of course, of Singapore as a port, the system, the ecosystem within Singapore, in terms of the number of suppliers, the regulations, the law, and everything. Geographical location, of course, makes a big difference, and that is why a lot of companies in our industry have either a global headquarter or a regional headquarter in Singapore. In our case, we have a regional headquarter. We employ roughly 140 people in Singapore, between the people in the office and those on board. And we've been growing in the last few years. We've been growing because the market has been growing, but also because we've been able to acquire a few assets from other players over the years, and that has allowed us again to have some sort of organic growth. Now, if I look at our experience in Singapore, what really worked well was our interaction with the authorities, with the local authorities, and specifically the Port Authority. We deal on a regular basis with government agencies, not only in Singapore but in other locations as well, and I have to say, I mean, not because now ETB is here represented, but there is a big difference in terms of the quality of people that we deal with in Singapore compared to other places at a government agency level. The Port Authority is an institution that is very business oriented. They understand the needs of the business. Every time there is the introduction of a new regulation or a new law, there's a process of consultation with the industry players before that takes place, and that is very helpful and gives, I think, a lot of trust to the whole process. One example is when in 2017, for example, we had the introduction of the mass flow meter. Now, I will not bore you with the details, but one of the issues that we have in the marine fuel industry is that there's let's call it a lack of reliability in many ports, where if you are a ship owner, you tend to be short supplied by physical suppliers locally. That problem was occurring in Singapore as well. However, Singapore introduced the mandatory implementation of a mass flow meter, which is simply a device that measures the quantity of fuel being supplied. That was a very bold statement, something that doesn't happen in other ports in the world, and it made Singapore even more desirable, even more sought after by players around the world. With regard to the future, we expect Singapore to continue having this central let's say, place in the industry. We do see some competition from Chinese ports. There's one port called Zhoushan in particular that has been growing quite significantly in the last few years. So that is sort of a bit of a threat for Singapore. However, on the other hand, to be honest, I don't think it is realistic to expect to have Zhoushan as a real competitor for Singapore. What we see is that Singapore continues to be relatively business friendly. Of course, the current situation with the pandemic is kind of challenging a lot of the part of the status quo that we were used to before, having Singapore as a regional hub with people being able to move around. But hopefully with vaccination speeding up, that will improve. We as a company, we continue to consider Singapore as a regional hub, and we plan to continue to have a strong presence here. We have recently added, recently meaning in the last 5-6 years, we've added our yachting activity, and we are expanding in the region. We opened our first office in Singapore about 6 years ago, and then we followed up with Indonesia and New Zealand. And now we're looking at Thailand and the Maldives. We do believe that Singapore is strategically located for anyone with an interest in the shipping industry, and we do believe that institutions continue to be business friendly.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you, Mr. Kasulic. You gave us another example of an Italian success story in Singapore. Now, as a miracle, we are right on time, huh? So we have a floor open for few questions, if any. Otherwise, I will ask President Prodi, I know he has to leave, President Martinelli or Ambassador Langella, or any other of the speakers, if they have any concluding remarks. Mr. Prodi, you have something to say?
Okay. No, I was very interested to the case stories that mean that step by step we have a increasing presence in Singapore. What I think now is that we in some way coordinate our presence. You know, it's we must work together. We must mobilize our authorities to help our ambassadors to work together and really in some way insist on the role of Singapore as, let's say, a reference point, not only of the market, but of technology. This was a common message we received together. Let's say Singapore is not a spot, but is a net of relations, you know. And so I think we have to concentrate more on our activity in Singapore. I just, let's say, dedicate more attention to this before coming to Singapore and try to give what I can in order to to increase the links among Italian entrepreneurs working in Singapore. This is, I do think, what I have to do. You know, sorry now that because of the change of time, I'm obliged to leave the group, and I am grateful for your patience, and let us keep in touch and start our cooperation for the future.
Thank you, President Prodi. I believe we are all happy that you're being baptized with your inauguration of being president of the Italy-ASEAN Association with this webinar with Singapore. Thank you again. President Martinelli, I think you would like some concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Romeo. Well, thank you for sharing to Di Zeta, Monica, to Kozulic team, and to Menarini, Luongo, because you really gave us an idea of Singapore as a regional hub. Now, I have a question also to Kimberly. In many domains, Singapore, as we clarified, is typically a regional hub. But for other sectors like financial, is already an international hub. Do you foresee Singapore maybe in connecting the knots between technology, high tech, and startup, between maybe EU, Italy, and the US on the other side? So it's, do you foresee some internalization and some international role in this sense for Singapore?
Sure. I mean, I can share my perspective, and I also invite the other panelists to share. Maybe I can address your question in two parts. The first is whether we have a global role. As you said, I think Singapore has been quite effective in positioning itself as a regional hub for a lot of activities, and that was quite similar to what the speakers shared as well. Moving forward, I think we do recognize that there is an opportunity to take on global initiatives and global projects, and we do want to encourage companies to consider Singapore not just as a regional hub, but also as a global hub. So yes, that ambition is there. The second part, in terms of startups and linkages between, for example, Asia and Europe, Asia and the US, generally it's something that we have been encouraging over the past few years. So within the startup space, for example, we have launched a Global Innovation Alliance, which is a program whereby we are setting up satellite offices and working with partners within ASEAN, for example, where there is an office in Jakarta, but also in other parts of Europe. So for example, we have an agreement with the French government under the Global Innovation Alliance, and we're actually looking for more partners within Europe to function, where we bring our own startups from Singapore to some of these markets, and then likewise from overseas startups into Singapore as well. So yes, it is something that we're definitely very keen to pursue. I think in Italy, to be honest, we probably haven't spent as much time as we could to look at the startup space, and I know it's quite exciting. So we're also happy to actually have that discussion together with ICCS and of course with some of the startups that could be interested to actually come to Singapore and also look at ASEAN as a bigger region. Yeah.
I apologize, Romeo, you are muted again. Sorry.
Thanks again, President Martinelli. Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly. I wonder why Ambassador Langella would like to have some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Romeo. Just on 3 issues, 10 seconds each. I mean, the first one is the implementation of the EU-Singapore trade agreement, free trade agreement, which is quite an important milestone in the history of relations, bilateral relations between the European Union and Singapore. It's also a benchmark that, I mean, will be met hopefully by other countries in the region. So it's our responsibility to implement it properly and faithfully. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, due to COVID-19 crisis, I mean, a lot of technical nitty-gritty which had been necessary, very much needed in order to implement the agreement that has been postponed. But at the end of the day, I mean, we hope that in the coming future, the agreement will be fully implemented, that it will be quite an important source of opportunities for our companies. Second, Singapore is an important and an extremely important partner for Italy when it comes to multilateralism and the international trading system. We have always been very strong allies on themes like free trade, the freedom of navigation, the climate change. As you know, Italy this year will chair the G20 group. Singapore has been invited. So Italy is also co-chair of COP26 together with the UK. I mean, we are working very, very effectively and fruitfully with the Singaporean authorities. They are helping us a lot in order to get the results we are expecting from these two exercises. And finally, this is more related to the activities of the Italian companies here in Singapore. I mean, I'm still convinced that there is a huge demand for Italian culture here in Singapore. There are a few Italian companies who are very active also on the cultural field. One of these companies, I mean, one of the actors that are more active in Singapore is the Zoli Foundation, Dino Zoli Foundation. They organize every year on the occasion of the Formula One Grand Prix a cultural event which is always very successful. So I would urge the other companies to do the same and try to maybe melt their economic and trade outreach with the cultural sensibility, which is very much welcome here in Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Allow me be patient a couple of minutes of remarks from the Italy-ASEAN Association. In the year 2017, we published a book to which also EDB gave a contribution, and Josephine Tan, your former Minister of Education in Singapore. The book was dedicated, first of its kind, to Italy and Singapore relationship, and it was given to President Tony Tan in his state visit to Italy, and also to President Mattarella of Italy. The second book we dedicated to Singapore was a research on the Italian companies in the ASEAN region. And as a confirmation of this webinar, we found that of those 522 Italian companies which invested in the 10 ASEAN countries, 133, meaning more than 26%, invested in Singapore. And the reasons for that is what you explained during your speeches. Being central, being efficient, being on the forefront of innovation. Of these companies, as can be easily expected, the majority were involved in services, and just a few very specialized in manufacturing. This is also due to the free trade agreement with Singapore, and also for the free flows of capitals and goods among the 10 ASEAN countries. We also in Singapore had the second high-level dialogue with the representative of both governments in the year 2018. So Singapore is also for the Italy-ASEAN Association as a magnet for initiative and interest. So I think it's time now to conclude. Before I do that, I want to thank everybody who participated. Allow me also to thank, beyond the speakers and the representative of the Italian Chamber of Commerce, also Roberto Fabbri, who is a component of the scientific committee of the Italy-ASEAN Association, has been living in Singapore for many, many years, and also has been part of the EDB. Thanks, Roberto. So I would like to conclude with the promise that this is the first pearl of our chain of collaboration in the future. Thank you again. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Grazie Romeo.
Thank you to everyone. Ciao.
Ciao Monica, ciao a tutti.
Ambassador, thank you.
Grazie, thank you.